You're tuned into The Deep Dive. And, wow, we're jumping right in today with some pretty dramatic news coming out of Moscow.
Yeah, really hitting the ground running.
A senior Russian general assassinated. And it sounds like something straight out of a spy novel, you know? A car bomb, shrapnel, and already whispers linking it to Ukrainian intelligence.
Well, it's dramatic, absolutely. But it's probably not quite out of the blue, is it? We need to see this against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine.
Right.
The front lines, they've been pretty static, haven't they? So intelligence ops, covert actions, these are becoming, well, much more significant tools for both sides, really.
Exactly. And that's what we want to unpack today. We've sifted through, a lot of material news reports, expert takes on intel ops, even some bits of on-the-ground reporting.
Time to connect the dots.
Yeah, connect the dots. Our mission here is to really get under the hood of this specific event, the killing of Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moskalik. Who was he? How did it happen? What's Russia saying and doing? The potential Ukraine angle, obviously.
And crucially, how it fits, or maybe disrupts, the bigger picture. The war itself and those very fragile ceasefire talks we keep hearing about.
Okay, let's dive in. General Moskalik. What do we know about him? Senior guy, obviously.
Very senior. Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moskalik.
Yeah.
A member of Russia's general staff.
Okay, and the general staff, that's like the central command, right? Operational planning, strategy.
Precisely. It's the nerve center of the Russian military. So being a senior figure there means significant influence, likely direct involvement in planning or logistics for the war effort.
And the attack itself? Where and how?
Happened in Balashikha. It's a suburb just east of Moscow. The method was, well, pretty brutal. An explosive device packed with shrapnel placed in a car.
Placed in a car.
Well, maybe on it. Reports very slightly, but definitely attached to the vehicle. Yeah. And it seems it was detonated remotely, right as General Moskalik approached or was nearby.
Wow. And the timing?
This was April 25th. And Russian investigators were on the scene fast, immediately labeling it a terrorist attack.
Okay. So, high-profile target, specific method, immediate accusation. What about Russia's response beyond labeling it? Have they named suspects?
They have, yeah. Very quickly, actually. They announced the detention of a man named Not Kuzin.
Not Kuzin.
And the Russian claim is pretty direct. They say he's an agent of Ukrainian Special Services, the SBU, or maybe the GUR. They haven't specified which, but definitely Ukrainian intelligence.
Do they provide any details about Kuzin? Who is he, according to them?
Look, according to Russian sources, he's originally from Sumy, which is in Ukraine, near the Russian border. But apparently he'd been living for quite some time in Karachay-Cherkessia.
That's a republic within Russia itself, right?
Exactly. So a Ukrainian native, but a long-term resident of Russia. And there's another layer. Russian media reports are claiming he was actually picked up in Turkey.
In Turkey. And then brought to Moscow.
That's the claim. Apprehended in Turkey, then transferred to Moscow. Now, how that transfer happened, whether it was extradition or something else, details are scarce.
Okay, so a Ukrainian national living in Russia, arrested in Turkey, accused of this assassination in Moscow. It's complex.
It is. And the charges Russia says they filed are serious terrorist act and illegal trafficking of explosives. So they're building a significant case against him, at least publicly.
Right. So Russia points the finger squarely at Ukraine. But like you said earlier, this isn't the first time we've seen these kinds of incidents. Can you give us a broader sense of Ukraine's intelligence activities during this war?
Sure. Since the full-scale invasion really kicked off in February 2022, Ukraine's intelligence agencies, mainly the SBU, the Security Service, and the GUR, military intelligence, they've been, let's say, remarkably active behind Russian lines.
Active how? What kind of things are we talking about?
It's a whole spectrum, really. Drone strikes, definitely. Sabotage, targeting things like railway lines, fuel depots, military bases, and, yes, assassinations.
What are they trying to achieve with these ops?
Well, several things, you could argue. First, bring the war home to Russia. Make the conflict feel real beyond the front lines. Second, instill a sense of fear and insecurity among Russian officials and maybe even the public. And third, practically speaking, disrupt and destroy resources, divert troops, damage equipment, hinder logistics.
And Moskalik isn't the first high-profile figure targeted like this, is he? I seem to remember something else last year.
You're right. The targets have been varied. We've heard about strikes on military HQs, obviously collaborators in occupied areas, propagandists. But yeah, senior military figures have been in the crosshairs.
The scooter bomb? Was that it?
That's the one. December last year, also in Moscow, another Russian general killed by an explosive device reportedly hidden in an electric scooter left nearby.
And did Ukraine claim that one?
Not officially through government channels, but sources within Ukrainian security services did acknowledge responsibility to media outlets afterwards.
Okay. So while Kiev hasn't commented specifically on Moskalik yet,
It absolutely fits the established pattern, yes. The methods, the target profile, it aligns.
how do they actually pull these things off? Deep inside Russia, Moscow suburbs? It seems incredibly difficult.
Well, it's likely a combination of factors. Small, elite special forces teams, certainly, but also, critically, intelligence assets agents on the ground. And perhaps most importantly, especially for sabotage, local partisan groups.
Partisans, you mean like Russian citizens opposed to the war or Ukrainians in occupied areas?
Both, potentially. There are reports of locally organized resistance networks, sometimes receiving support or direction from Ukrainian intelligence, sometimes acting more independently. They can provide intel, carry out attacks. It gives Ukraine reach and also a degree of plausible deniability.
It's a shadowy world. And the timing of this latest assassination, it feels particularly charged, doesn't it? Coming just as we're hearing about these high-level ceasefire talks.
The timing is, it's hard to ignore. We had U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff reportedly meeting with Putin, discussing potential paths forward. And adding another layer, General Moskalik himself, apparently, had been part of Russian delegations in previous rounds of negotiations aimed at resolving the conflict.
Wow. Okay, so the victim was actually involved in past peace efforts.
According to some reports, yes. Which makes the timing even more pointed, perhaps.
And what are we hearing about the substance of these potential ceasefire talks? What are the reported terms?
The reported proposals, possibly pushed by the U.S., seem quite significant. They supposedly include things like Ukraine being excluded from joining NATO.
A major Russian demand from the start.
Absolutely. Also, potentially lifting some economic sanctions on Russia, freezing the current front lines, which would leave Russia occupying about, 20% of Ukrainian territory?
And the big one, Crimea.
And Crimea. The reports suggest one potential term is the recognition of Crimea as Russian territory.
That just seems like a non-starter for Kiev, doesn't it?
It's consistently been described as a fundamental red line for Ukraine. President Zelensky has been very clear, citing the Ukrainian constitution, international law, that they won't legally recognize occupied territories as belonging to Russia.
Even if they can't retake it militarily right now.
Exactly. He's acknowledged the current military reality regarding Crimea, suggesting maybe sanctions could be leveraged down the road, but legal recognition seems off the table.
What about Russia's view on these talks? Are they receptive?
Well, Foreign Minister Lavrov has made some comments suggesting Russia might be, let's say, more open to a deal now than before. But he also immediately added that the specific terms currently proposed would need, quote, adjustments. So perhaps some willingness, but not on those exact reported terms.
So you have these incredibly sensitive talks potentially happening, or at least being explored, and then bang, this assassination happens. How do these intelligence operations, these attacks, affect the negotiation climate? Are they bargaining chips?
Probably not direct bargaining chips in the sense of stop bombing us and we'll stop these attacks. But they absolutely shape the environment.
How so?
Well, Ukraine, demonstrating this capability, this reach deep into Russia, sends a powerful message, doesn't it? It shows resilience. It shows the war has consequences for Russia itself, not just on Ukrainian soil. It might subtly influence the strategic calculations on both sides, even if it's not explicitly discussed at the negotiating table. It raises the stakes, shows Russia isn't invulnerable.
Which brings us to this whole strategy of high-value targeting, going after key individuals like Moskalik. We see it used in various conflicts. But does it actually work in the long run? What does history tell us?
Yeah, that's a really critical question. The idea of taking out key leaders, high-value targets, or HVTs, it seems logical, right?
Yeah.
Cut off the head of the snake.
Hey, weaken the organization, disrupt their command.
Exactly. And sometimes, maybe it provides the sense of justice or causes temporary chaos. But the historical evidence, it's much more mixed. Often, it doesn't actually lead to the long-term collapse of the group you're targeting.
Really? Why not?
Well, several reasons. Sometimes killing a leader turns them into a martyr.
Ah, right.
It can actually energize their followers, boost recruitment, make them even more determined. Think about, say, the founder of Boko Haram. His death didn't end the group. Arguably, it fueled it.
Okay. What else?
There's the risk of creating power vacuums. Sometimes the person who steps up is even more radical, more ruthless than the one you removed. We saw dynamics like that with the Taliban over the years.
So you might inadvertently empower someone worse.
It's a definite risk. Also, Constantly targeting leaders can sometimes lead to the group fragmenting. Instead of one enemy, now you have several potentially competing, which can actually escalate violence and make things harder to manage. Think about some of the Mexican cartel situations. And then there's the reliance on maybe less reliable local partners for intelligence or execution, which can undermine efforts to build stable governance later on, like issues seen in Afghanistan or Iraq. Plus, the ever-present danger of civilian casualties if the intelligence or execution isn't perfect.
So it's not a magic bullet.
Far from it. The analysis suggests that effective targeting, if you're going to do it, really needs to be driven by deep strategic intelligence. Not just hitting targets of opportunity, but understanding the likely ripple effects and whether it truly serves the larger strategic goal rather than just creating martyrs or more chaos.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, flipping the coin. What's Russia doing to counter these kinds of Ukrainian operations on its own soil? They can't just be letting this happen.
No, they're definitely trying to push back. One tactic we've seen evidence of is Russia attempting to recruit Ukrainian citizens, often young people, sometimes even minors, to carry out sabotage inside Ukraine or against Ukrainian interests.
Recruiting Ukrainians to hit targets in Ukraine.
Or sometimes in Russia itself, targeting things like military recruitment centers, railways, other critical infrastructure. They try to find vulnerable individuals, often using online platforms like Telegram.
Is it working? Is Ukraine seeing much of this?
Well, Russia's certainly trying, but Ukraine's security service, the SBU, seems to be having some success in disrupting it. They launched this initiative, a chatbot actually, called Bust FSB Agent.
A chatbot?
Yeah, basically a secure channel for citizens to report suspected recruitment attempts or suspicious activity. And apparently, it's been quite effective.
How effective?
The SBU claims they've received over 5,000 reports through this chatbot in a fairly short time, and that information has led to the detention of more than 600 individuals allegedly involved in working for or being recruited by Russia.
Wow, that's a significant number. What's motivating these people Russia's trying to recruit?
Primarily, it seems to be money. Financial incentives.
Yeah.
But there's a really disturbing aspect to this. The evidence suggests Russia often treats these recruits as completely expendable, basically cannon fodder.
Expendable how?
There was one truly chilling case reported. A 15-year-old was killed and a 17-year-old badly injured. They had apparently been recruited online, paid to transport what they thought were disguised thermoses. But the thermoses contained explosives.
Oh, no.
And Russian handlers allegedly detonated the devices remotely once the teenagers reached the intended target area. It just highlights the incredible danger, the callousness involved. They're seen as disposable tools.
That's horrifying. Just utterly cynical.
It paints a grim picture of the counterintelligence struggle happening alongside the overt conflict.
It really does. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. As we start to wrap up this deep dive, could you maybe just crystallize the main takeaways for us?
Sure. So, key points. We had the assassination of a very senior Russian general, Moskalik, right near Moscow. Russia immediately blamed Ukrainian intelligence and announced the detention of a suspect as not Kuzin. This event needs to be seen within the context of Ukraine's ongoing and seemingly bolder intelligence operations inside Russia. Sabotage, drones, previous assassinations. All of this is happening against the really tense backdrop of potential ceasefire negotiations, where major sticking points, especially Crimea, remain unresolved.
And the strategy itself.
And yeah, the strategy of high-value targeting, while maybe impactful short-term, has a complex and often questionable track record for long-term success, with significant potential downsides. And finally, the counterintelligence fight, with Russia trying to recruit saboteurs in Ukraine, actively working to disrupt those efforts.
So many layers, so many moving parts. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What does this assassination, this specific act, really signal in the grand scheme of the war?
Does it change calculations?
Yeah, how might it actually impact those ceasefire talks, however fragile they are? Does it harden positions? Does it create leverage? And just thinking bigger picture, what are the long-term implications when intelligence operations become this prominent, this daring?
These are exactly the right questions to be asking. And digging into these dynamics, I think, gives you, the listener, a much richer understanding than just following the daily battle lines. It gets to the deeper currents of the conflict.
It definitely does. And maybe a final thought to leave everyone with. In conflicts today, we see this constant, really complex dance between the visible war, the tanks, the trenches, and this invisible war fought in the shadows by intelligence agencies.
A constant push and pull.
Exactly. Where are the ethical lines drawn in that shadowy realm? What are the strategic calculations? And maybe most importantly, what are the unforeseen consequences of these covert actions as everyone searches or claims to search for a path towards some kind of resolution, something to really mull over?